I understand we are at kilometer 41 of the marathon of today, and the idea of this session is to put us on track for the advocacy forum to identify those main items which should be treated in terms of climate environment at the forum. I think this could be a very easy task, having heard all the contributions over the day. So I understand, I suppose we are much more in a situation which in Italian would be called l'imbarazzo della scelta, because so many topics have been raised. If you allow me, I would like to propose 3 subjects which actually derive from my previous assignment in the German diplomatic service just before coming to Rome last September. In 2019, after 10 years of service in East Asia, and considering myself a typical general purpose diplomat, I became head of the division on climate and environmental foreign policy at the Foreign Office in Berlin. When I started this assignment, I definitely did not know a lot about climate change or the relevance of biodiversity. Even today, after 3 years on the job, I'm certainly still not an expert. However, having closely followed the developments in this field for some years, I think there are 3 important insights I took away from my work, which might also be helpful for discussion today. And I understand that nearly all these issues have also been raised during the previous sessions. The first one is climate and security. The second one is climate and education. And the third one is climate and justice. As to the first one, although the actual mechanisms are as yet not well determined scientifically, climate change acts as an important driver for conflict and insecurity. That is why Germany, for instance, with many like-minded partner countries, is working for more than 10 years now to mainstream the climate and security nexus into the international security and conflict prevention and resolution mechanisms, especially in the UN. As to the second one, education. My own personal development over these years working on climate and environmental foreign policy shows that education is crucial for helping people, me in this case, to better assess the consequences of climate change and environmental degradation and thus take informed decisions and actions. Third, being part of the generation in a developed country which by our lifestyle and ever-increasing welfare over more than 70 years of peace bears a great deal of responsibility for our current problems, I understood that when we discuss the climate and environmental crises, we have to realize that this is above all an equity and justice issue. By this I mean not only the important issue of intergenerational justice with regard to our children and future generations, but also an international problem and therefore highly relevant for foreign policy. We should not forget that industrial nations, which are home to just a quarter of humankind, are responsible for 80% of historical carbon emissions between 1850 and 2010. Yet, we have to bear in mind that those 3 items I just put forward are not standing separately. They are rather closely intertwined. So just to give you an example, when we talk about climate and security, we can see that mostly countries in the global south, which definitely are not responsible for global warming, as our countries, usually are the most affected by conflict situations, exacerbated by the consequences of climate change. We can also see that climate change very often plays an important role through several, sometimes not yet well explored chains of effects on globally relevant issues like migration and gender. Very often women have to endure the most when coping with the effects of land degradation and water scarcity, because it is upon them to have to secure the livelihood of families by providing water or heating material. In conflict situations, they are often the target of human trafficking or organized crime. I am proud to say that therefore my government recently issued guidelines on feminist foreign policy, which explicitly refer to women as important actors in our climate diplomacy. The guidelines also request efforts to outweigh the negative effects of climate change on women and marginalized groups. Implementation of the guidelines, which are accompanied by guidelines on a feminist development aid policy, will definitely, over the next years, to lead to a substantial and comprehensive reorientation of German foreign and development aid policy. And here I really would like to invite UISG to use us in the embassy here as a liaising point, as a liaising tool, as an entry point, because I think I asked my colleagues in Germany who are in the Foreign Office responsible for development aid policy, do they know UISG? And the answer was unfortunately no. So we are here, and I think even if we discuss the situation of church and religion in Germany, but I do think the new feminist foreign policy of Minister Baerbock is a very useful and very important entry point for cooperation. Likewise, it seems to be necessary that the international community has to deal with the complex relationship between migration and the climate crisis. We cannot exclude that in certain cases and under certain circumstances, the necessity to migrate is one of the consequences of global warming. When we further develop this thought, we might, passing by the polluter pays principle, arrive at the question of justice and equity. And I'm again at the fact that all these issues are intertwined and correlated among each other. There are voices that state that the migration in a decent and safe way as an instrument of adaptation to climate change is an issue of climate justice. Yet, the current international regulatory framework on migration seems to be lacking severely in terms of taking climate change and environmental degradation in consideration as a cause for migration. I hope with these very general thoughts I just shared with you, I could provide some impetuses for our upcoming discussion on this issue of crucial importance for all of us. There is no doubt that we need more pressure on decision makers in politics and business, and also more advocacy towards our societies in order for them to realize the urgency of the challenges. The initiative taken by UISG is therefore not only welcome, but also urgent and necessary. Very often people say, well, mankind was always able to adapt. That is right. But we should not forget that the changes which are now going on in our environment are without precedence for the last several thousand years. Sea levels are rising faster than ever over 3,000 years. CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere are higher than over at least 2 million years. As UN Secretary General Guterres said, we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. Somebody has to apply the brakes. Thank you.